Hey, my name is Levi Crenshaw. I'm 33 years old, and I run a two-bay auto shop on Highway 16 just outside Bandera, Texas. It's got my name on the sign now, but it said Prines for 41 years before that, and half the county still calls it that, and I've stopped correcting them. The first Friday she came in was the second week of September, about 20 past 4 in the afternoon, and I had a transmission pan off a Silverado and both hands full. Green Ford Ranger, early 2000s, a lot of miles on it. It rolled onto my gravel slow and stopped short of the bay doors, and a woman got out and stood by the fender the way people do when they don't want to interrupt. She said, "I'm so sorry, there's a noise." I asked her what kind of noise. She said, kind of a noise. Which, professionally speaking, is about 80% of the diagnostic information I get in a given week. Now, before I take you through it, I'm going to jump ahead, because I've found this story doesn't sit right if you don't know where it's going. 5 Fridays later, that same woman stood in my open bay door with her keys in her hand and said 7 words to me that I have thought about probably once a week ever since. She said, "It doesn't actually break down, you know. I'll come back to it." But everything in between only means something once you know she's going to say it. Her name was June Talent, 30 years old, and she wasn't from Bandera, which I established within about 4 minutes, because I know most everybody who drives a Green Ranger in this county. I put it on the lift and ran it up and had a look, and I want to tell you exactly what I found that first afternoon, because it matters. Nothing. Brakes were fine. U-joints tight. Exhaust hangers all where they should be. I drove it up and down Highway 16 for 2 miles, with the window down listening for anything at all, and heard a truck with 240,000 miles on it, sounding exactly like a truck with 240,000 miles on it. I came back in and told her I couldn't find anything. And she said okay, and she did not seem even slightly disappointed, which at the time I put down to relief. Then she said, "Can I just sit for a minute? I've got a long drive. There's an old church pew outside my bay too." Ollie Prine dragged it out of a torn-down chapel in 1990-something and put it against the wall, and it's been there ever since. It's where people sit while they wait on an oil change and complain about the county. She sat on that pew for 45 minutes. I charged her nothing, because I hadn't done anything, and she said thank you about 4 times on her way out. The next Friday she came back. 4:20 in the afternoon, same truck, same slow roll onto the gravel. It's a different noise. I got under it. This time I actually found something, a heat shield above the catalytic that had a bolt gone and was buzzing against the pipe, which is a real noise and a real annoying one, and which takes about 11 minutes and 1 hose clamp to fix permanently. I fixed it. I told her it was done and there wasn't anything to charge her for. She said, "You have to let me pay you something." I said, "It was a hose clamp." She sat on the pew for an hour that time. Ollie was out there in his lawn chair, which is where Ollie is most afternoons. He's 80, and he sold me the business 4 years ago, and he has not once gone a full week without coming by to make sure I haven't ruined it. He talked to her about the weather and about a dog he used to have, and I could hear her laughing at something from inside the bay, and I remember standing there with a socket in my hand, thinking that was a nice sound to have on the property. 3rd Friday. Now, I'm going to be honest with you about the 3rd Friday, because this is where I stopped being able to pretend I didn't know. She rolled in at 4:20. She said there was a noise, and I knew there wasn't a noise. I put it on the lift anyway. I spent 40 minutes under a truck I had been under twice in 15 days, checking things I had already checked, because the alternative was to come out from underneath it and say something, and I could not for the life of me work out what the something was. She's not a woman who's scared of me. She'd sat on that pew for 2 hours across 2 weeks. She's not somebody in trouble. There's nothing on that truck that says trouble, and she's not flirting, or if she is, she's doing it in the most confusing manner I have ever encountered. So I did what a man does when he doesn't know what to say. I stayed under the truck. When I came out, I told her the front end was going to want ball joints in a year or so, which was true, and which was the single most useful thing I had to offer. She said, "A year, okay, good." And then she sat on the pew until about 5:45. Ollie watched her pull out of the lot, and then he turned around in that lawn chair and looked at me for a while. He said, "You find the noise?" I said no. He said, "You going to keep looking for it?" And I said, "I guess I am." And Ollie Prine, who has said maybe 400 words to me since 2021, said, "Good. Some folks gotta have a reason to stop somewhere. Don't take her reason off her before she's done with it." Then he went back to reading a seed catalog he'd already read. The fourth Friday it rained. Not Texas rain, where it's 40 minutes of violence and then sun. The other kind. Gray all afternoon, steady, the kind that turns my gravel into something you should not park a low car on. She came anyway. 4:20. I didn't even ask about a noise. I just said, pull it in bay 2. And she did. And then we were both standing in a bay with a truck, and rain on a metal roof, and nowhere for either of us to go. That was the first time we actually talked. She'd grown up in Uvalde. She'd done 2 years at Texas State and then not finished, and gone into ultrasound tech instead. And she worked at the hospital up in Kerrville, weekend option, 12-hour shifts Saturday and Sunday, which pays a premium and which nobody with a normal life wants. I told her about buying the shop off Ollie in a deal that took 2 years and involved a handshake, a lawyer neither of us liked, and Ollie repeatedly trying to lower his own price. Somewhere in the middle of it she mentioned a boy named Toby. She said it fast, the way you say a thing you've decided in advance to say lightly. 6 years old, obsessed with garbage trucks to a degree that had begun to concern the adults around him. I asked where he was on Fridays. And she looked at the rain for a second and said, with his dad, weekends. Then she said, that's a whole thing, and I let it be a whole thing, because it was 4:15 on a Friday in September and it was not mine to open. She stayed until nearly 7 that night. That's 2.5 hours. Ollie went home at 5 and I didn't. The 5th Friday she didn't pull into the lot. She parked on the shoulder just past my mailbox and walked up the gravel with her keys in her hand and stood in the open bay door. I said, truck, all right? And she said it. It doesn't actually break down, you know. I put down what I was holding. She said, there was never a noise, not the first time either. I made it up, and then I made up a different one, and then you found a heat shield and I felt so guilty about that hose clamp I nearly told you right there. I didn't say anything, because I'd had about 3 weeks to work out that there was no noise, and about 0 seconds to work out what I was going to do when she said so out loud. She said, I need to explain it, and then I'll go, and I'll find somewhere else. And I said, you don't have to find somewhere else. She said, let me get through it. Here's what she told me, standing in a bay door on the 3rd of October. The custody order is every weekend. Toby goes to his father Friday evening and comes back Sunday night, because she works Saturday and Sunday, because weekend option pays $4 an hour more than weekday, and that $4 is what makes the numbers work. She agreed to it. Nobody forced her. It was the sensible arrangement, and she'd argue for it again today. Toby's father lives in Bandera. That's why she's in Bandera at all. She finishes at 3, drives down from Kerrville, hands him over at 4, and then it's done. And then she has to drive 50 minutes north to a house with nobody in it. She said for about a year I couldn't do it. I'd hand him over and get in that truck, and I could not make myself drive home. So I'd sit in the Sonic lot on Main and eat something I didn't want for an hour, and then a Whataburger for a while after that. And then in August, somebody I work with saw me doing it and asked if I was all right, and I decided I'd rather never do that again as long as I live. She said, and in September I drove past a shop with a church pew outside it, and there was an old man sitting in a lawn chair, and it looked like the only place in this town where a person could sit for an hour without anybody deciding something about them. Then she said, so I made up a noise. She was crying by then, a little, in an irritated way, like the crying had turned up uninvited. I've been lying to a mechanic for a month, because I can't be alone in my own truck for 50 minutes. I'm aware of what that is. I'm 30 years old. And I said the only thing I had. I said, June, I've known there was no noise since the 3rd Friday. She looked up. I said, Ollie clocked it before I did. He told me not to take your reason off you before you were done with it. So I've been getting under a truck for 40 minutes every Friday for 3 weeks, because I couldn't think of a way to tell you that you didn't need one. She stood there. Then she said, that's the most embarrassing thing anybody's ever done for me. And I said, it's a pew. It's been out there 30 years. It's not doing anything else. She sat down on it that afternoon, and I got her a coffee out of the machine in the office, which is a bad machine, and she drank it anyway. And then something changed, which is that she stopped leaving at 6. The next Friday she brought a folding chair out of her truck bed and set it next to Ollie's, which Ollie treated as a formal appointment to something. The Friday after that she brought 2 sandwiches, and when I said she didn't have to do that, she said, I know exactly how much you've charged me for 4 months of labor, Levi, so I would sit down. By November it wasn't a thing either of us pretended about. She'd come at 4 and I'd close the bay at 5:30 instead of 6:30, and we'd sit out on that pew until it got dark, which in November is early enough to be almost respectable. I asked her about Toby's father once because I'd started to want to know and because I'd decided not to be a man who works around a subject. She said Grant was fine. That's the word she used, and she meant it plainly. They married at 23 because they thought that was the next thing, and it took them 6 years to work out it wasn't. He's engaged to a woman named Dana, who is genuinely kind to Toby, and who June has never been able to dislike, no matter how much easier that would have made things. She said, "There's no villain. That's what nobody warns you about. Everybody keeps waiting for me to tell them the bad part, and there isn't one. There's just a house with nobody in it on Friday nights." I met Toby in December. Grant's truck broke down for real, an alternator, on a Tuesday, and he brought it to me because I'm the shop on Highway 16, and he had no idea who I was to anybody. And on the Friday when he came to collect it, Toby was in the back seat, and June was in my lot at the same time because it was 4 o'clock on a Friday. So all 4 of us were standing in my gravel at once, which is a situation I would not have designed. Grant shook my hand and said the alternator was good work and asked what he owed, and June introduced me as her friend Levi, and Toby got out of the truck without asking anybody and walked straight past all 3 adults to look at my rollback tow truck. He said, "Is that yours?" I said it was. He said, "Does it pick up garbage trucks?" I said it could pick up a garbage truck if a garbage truck needed picking up, which is technically true, and which was, in that child's estimation, the single most important fact anybody had told him that year. Grant laughed. That's the part I'd want you to know about Grant. He laughed, and he said, "Oh no," in the voice of a man who understood he was going to be hearing about a rollback for the next 4 months. They left. June stayed. That was a little over 2 years ago. The Sonic lot is not part of anybody's life anymore. What happens now is that Toby comes to the shop on Friday afternoons and Grant collects him from here at 5, which was Grant's suggestion and not mine or June's, and which took about 4 seconds to become normal. Toby has a milk crate he stands on to see into an engine bay, and he is, at 8 years old, better at handing me the correct wrench than 2 grown men who have worked for me. Ollie died in the spring of last year, 81. He'd been coming by 4 days a week, right up to the end of February, and he told me twice in his last month that I'd finally stopped ruining the place, which from Ollie is a eulogy. June and I bought a house between Bandera and Pipe Creek in the fall. 50 minutes is now 11 minutes, which she pointed out on the day we signed like it was a piece of arithmetic that had personally offended her for years. We got married in April. I kept the pew. I want to be clear that I moved that pew, at some expense and with real difficulty, from outside Bay 2 at the shop to the front porch of a house 11 minutes away, and that when June asked me why, I told her it was structurally sound and I wasn't going to throw out a good bench. Which she accepted, at the time, with a face that told me she was not accepting it at all. Last Friday I got home, and Toby was on it, upside down the way he sits on everything, and he asked me why we have a church bench on the porch when we have chairs. And June, from the doorway, before I could say one word about it being structurally sound, said, "Because that's where I used to sit." Toby said, "Sit when?" And she said, "Before." And he said, "Before what?" And she said, "Before this," and went back inside to check something on the stove, and left me standing on my own porch with a wrench in my hand and nothing at all to say.